Well, hey guys, so today we are going to be using several selection tools to affect a change on one particular area of a picture. And we have this picture here, and you'll notice a couple of things. The background is pretty well lit, but our players are sort of dark. Now I could go over here to image adjustments and levels and brighten the whole thing up, but I'd probably risk brighten the whole thing up here. I'd probably risk making everything a bit too exposed in the background. I think it's okay. So go ahead and do this. Go ahead and just bring up the levels. Now you'll notice that there's only so much the camera can capture. Sometimes if you have, especially with RAW files, you can have things that are overexposed or underexposed, and you can still get the details if you adjust the levels. But this is good enough for us. We don't really necessarily need to see this player's face. I want to isolate this player here in particular, right? So what I want to do is I want to select just him. Now we've already talked about the Marquee Tool, and I think to a certain extent we talked a bit about the Lasso tool, just in terms of adding selections and stuff. But let's find the Lasso tool, and if you hold the mouse button down on top of it, you can find several different tools to use that are like the Lasso tool, and one in particular is the magnetic lasso tool. So I want to take this magnetic lasso tool, and what's cool about this is that it sort of selects along edges. It detects sort of difference in sort of color, and it tries to select along this edge. Now this has some pitfalls, but it's still pretty useful. Now the thing about this, pardon me, is that whenever you select with the magnetic lasso tool, watch what happens here. I'm going to click once somewhere along the outline of this player here, and I'm going to start moving around, and it starts to it starts to stick to the various outer details of where his figure begins and the background information ends. Now, at some point, I'm going to have to kind of stop using this, but if I ever want to, say for instance, choose a new tool, I've got two options. I can kind of come back around here and I can close the circle. So I'm going to go around the edge as far as I can just to get as much of this as I possibly can select. And I'm going to come back around until I see the this is a little circle. It's hard to see here, but you'll notice the cursor, the magnetic lasso has this little tiny circle there. It's closing the selection. As soon as I click that, it makes the selection. Now, what I've selected right now actually isn't the player. So if I take my little brush out and I try to put some color on here, I could conceivably mark up where I've got this selected over here in the corner. But as soon as I go towards the player, it stops. So you can't affect anything that's inside or outside the selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly complete this, but you have to be careful with the magnetic lasso tool, because if you start to make the selections, I'll start over here, and I want to make sure this is going to add to the selection. So I'll select this right here, add to selection, and I'll just click on his helmet, and I'll sort of kind of come around here and add to it, and come around to the top. But if, for instance, I want to choose a new tool, and I go over this way and I try to make a new tool, you'll notice that the clone stamp tool doesn't go away. I have to close it out, or I have to press the escape button. That's the only way you can kind of disengage that. So be careful with this, and we'll just see if we can't select this whole thing. I'll just go around here. So I want to make sure I'm selecting just him, not the other player. So pull this around. There's going to be a little bit of trouble with the where the body of the referee kind of matches up with the player here, and I'll just come around here, all along the outer edges, and I'll come around the sort of corners of the picture here, so hopefully we can get a good selection going on here, and I'll come around back to his helmet so I can really match up good, and then you'll see this little circle once again, you click, and now we have all this selected here. So we can continue selecting. I'll go right here in the little gap in his arm, and this is going to add to the selection as well. Right. And then I'll continue on by just clicking on his arm up here and right along here. So this is going to be a kind of a rough selection at first, but we'll clean it up in a bit. You just want to make sure that you're closing out, and make sure that you have your little you've added in, you set it to where it's going to add to the selection each time. So this is about everything I need. Now, there are several, if you zoom in close, especially like for instance, oh, here, pitching his arm. Okay. And it's important to get as many details as we possibly can here because we're gonna make everything else black and white except for our player here. So I'm gonna zoom in just slightly, and if I were to say get close to, let's see if I can find it. Right here where his hand is. There's several things that we couldn't quite get when we were zoomed out. So we can zoom in a bit and we can kind of come back around inside the hand and get some of this hand detail here. There we go. Zoom out. And I want to say that's about right. But if we want to get everything, I would say the best tool to use right now would be what's called the quick mask. Now the quick mask is activated by pressing the letter Q on your keyboard. Now you'll notice here we've got things that are selected in red and things that are not selected in red. Now the things that are selected in red are things that we have not selected. And the way we select these things using the quick mask tool is using the brush. If we use the brush and we use black, that removes things from the selection. If we were to switch the colors from black to white, so if you don't see black and white on your keyboard, say for instance you have like, you know, black and red selection, you can just click D and it'll come back to black and white. But this right here, if you switch to white by pressing the letter X or just clicking this little bent arrow here, you can get that get that right there. So what I'll do is I'll just go around, I'll find all the spots that I want to have selected, and I'll paint them with white by kind of using the brush tool over here. Just come on here to the side. I might zoom in a good deal, and you definitely want your brush to be hard as well. You don't want your brush to have any softness. You want this to be really clean edges here. Let's come in here. And I'll get this as well. Holding the space bar, you can grab and navigate. You get all this selected. And that way, when we come to the end of it all, have the whole on-site image selected here. Oops. Okay, and there's a bit of his shoulder that hasn't been selected, a bit of his arm as well. So I'll switch over to black, and I might make this a little bit smaller here just so I can get some details. Oops. Switch over to black here. See if I can't get as close as I possibly can. Now, if you get really close in and make your brush really small, you can get really granular with this and really exact. But it's up to you, and obviously the more careful you are, the better it'll look. Shrink that down a little bit, get the little details of his mask here. I want to say there's a bit of his arm as well. Oops. Some inertia to my little dragging. There we go. Okay, get all that. Okay, that looks good. All right, so we have basically just the player colored red, which indicates that he's been selected. So once again, you get to this by pressing the letter Q on your keyboard. So when I press the letter Q again on my keyboard, it'll take the quick mask away, and we'll see those marching ants. So here it is. We'll see the marching ants, right? Now, like I said before, we have everything but the player selected. So once again, if I were to like maybe take some red paint here and just sort of like start putting it all over the place, it would go everywhere but the player. So we want to make sure that we have the player selected. So I'll do that. The way we do this, we can click on the Marquee Tool, we can right click, and we can say select inverse. Basically, we're going to change the selection from what we have selected now to everything we don't have selected. So once again, if I take my brush tool, it won't paint on anywhere but the player. So I can just go run through here and it'll paint nothing but the player. So that's what we want. Now, we're not going to operate on this layer here. Let's get back to the Marquee Tool. Let's right-click on the player we have selected, and let's do a layer via copy. So we do a layer via copy. So now we have two layers. If I were just, put this now we don't have a background here, but we want to keep this background for now. So let's go over here to Image, Adjustments, and let's go to Desaturate. All right, so now we have it desaturated, and let's see if we can't bring the contrast down a bit so it doesn't have quite as much information here. We don't want hue and saturation, we want it to go to Adjustments. Right, there's a contrast, I'll bring the contrast down some. It's sort of, and then we'll, it's okay. And then we're going to add a blur to it. We're going to blur everything out in the background. So we're going to go Gaussian blur. If you didn't see that there, I have filter. I'm going to choose blur. I'm going to choose Gaussian blur. I'm going to make this pretty blurry. I'm going to maybe blur it 20 pixels here. Well, maybe 40 pixels. 40 is good. All right, so that way he really stands out. And I can even go so far as to go over here to the layer 1, go to Images, Adjustments, and then go to Hue and Saturation. Maybe bring up his saturation a good deal. Really make him stand out. All right. So this is how we separate things from the background. Now in this case, we can still kind of see his outline sort of glowing around him. So I don't want that to be super obvious. So I'm going to maybe expand the size here. It looks like we have some things off to the side that we don't need. If ever you want to see if you really got just the player, you could always just click on the Move tool and it'll show you the constraints of what you have selected. So I'm just going to make my eraser really big and kind of erase down here just to see if I can't get rid of everything. Looks like there's still some more information here. I wonder if I were to zoom out and move him around, if I could see anything. It's over on the top there. Right, so I'll just press the eraser and just erase. No. At any rate, what I'll do is I'll just use my Move tool here. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. And I'll pull him back onto his outline here, just so I can put him a little bit closer to the quote camera, as it were. And then, hey, well, let's just put some typography on here. Let's get our typing tool. Let's find something really big and blocky, and we'll just find something like if you have Berlin Sans, or if you have Impact, or if you have maybe not Cooper Black. I've got a lot of fonts that I've downloaded over the years here. Let's see if I can't find Impact. Impact's a good one. And I'll just click anywhere, and I'll make this blue. What I'll do is I'll actually open up my my color palette here, and when you choose a color, you can choose from all these different options. You can also come over here and you can sample something from the picture itself. So I'll use this right here. I'll go to OK, and I'll click and I'll say, Ace Football. That's actually a bit too dark. It's actually too hard to see. I'll just change it to white. So what we can do now, I'm going to make this Ace a good deal bigger. I'm going to try to make it as wide as the word football. So Ace Football. And then we can take our Move tool. We can expand it to whatever size we want here. And I'll just make this big. I'll hold down the Shift key just so it doesn't. What I'll do here is I'll just maybe rotate it slightly. Because you want something blocky, and you definitely want a sans serif font. You definitely don't want one of those fonts that has like the tails on the on the player. This is from last year. This isn't from a recent game. This is from last year's game. I haven't been to a game yet. I see I can't get out there before the season's over because we don't have that too many. So definitely put your watermark on here. So I'm going to click over here. I'll just put my name below. Make sure it's all caps. And I'll bring down the opacity of this just so I can maybe not make this quite as distracting. I'll make this opacity maybe like 25%. So 3%. So there's that. And I might even like just sneak it down here. I'll make it smaller. Okay, so with this done, we can go ahead and save this. And we'll just go to File, Save, and it automatically saves it as PSD because we have more than one layer. So I'll just call it I'll just call it Selection Tools. Okay, and then I'll save it as a JPEG. I'll turn this in as a JPEG when you turn it and save that. So, saving. Back right here. File, save. This. And we'll call this Selection Tools .jpeg. Find a JPEG here. Press save. And this will be the thing that you save that you submit to D2L. All right, very good.